First of all, let's clarify one, two things on the EU budget. There are some voices in the Parliament that say that the framework has to change totally, mostly the Liberal Party. Do you think that it is the right time to make such changes, or are there changes that are doable right now and recommended in order to have adequate resources?
Of course, I negotiated twice the multi-annual budget framework, the framework 2017-2013 and 2014-2020. I would say dreams is something for private life. In politics, you must have realistic visions. And after we agreed the new budget framework until 2020, it was obvious for us that in the second half, a real revision is needed because we will run out of payments, and this very tight framework does not respond properly to the new challenges we are facing, like common border control, refugee crisis, to take it also as a common issue. Member states did a lot of mistakes. They didn't take on board all these new things. So therefore, let's try to get these proposals from the Commission, which are not touching the big blocks of the budget because they are national envelopes, but they are an intelligent answer. Under the existing circumstances, we have to work. And to clarify, we have as well that we expect from United Kingdom, which is on the way to leave via Brexit, they should be very careful and not to intervene in areas where they are out when it is implemented.
Let me ask you on this. Let's say that the Britain triggers Article 50 and the procedure starts. There are issues like participation in the single market or in other areas that have to be discussed, but do you think that actually someone can participate in the single market, for instance, without paying its share?
No, it cannot work. We agreed on the free movements, including free movement of people as the hardcore of the internal market. Let me take the example of Norway. Norway and also Iceland and in another way Switzerland are joining under certain conditions the internal market. Norway contributes 700 million euros every year to be part of the internal market. They even give specific fundings to 15 countries, especially in the area of sustainable development, economic stability and research. And to participate in research programs in Erasmus, of course they have to contribute. You cannot imagine, let's say, the so-called net payers take over the British contribution and they just have access for free. This does not happen in theatre as well.
So which is the best way for the EU to start the negotiations?
Of course, the ball is in the field of the Brits. They don't have a real plan till now. And let's say there were some politicians from the so-called elite which saw the priority in their political career and they didn't see the real interest of the country. So we are now in a difficult situation. If Brexit means Brexit, there are different options. It's between Norway or Kazakhstan finally. And the idea that they just can negotiate international trade agreements within 2 years period is a dream. We know how long it lasts and they don't have even the resources and the capacities because the last years it was the Commission negotiating based on a mandate of member states international trade agreements. And it's not the case that China, India or Brazil is just waiting for the Brits.
Do you think that the CETA agreement could work as a guideline for this?
I think CETA is an agreement which is one of the best trade agreements ever achieved, also taking on board certain recommendations from Parliament as far as the new model of dispute settlement agreement is concerned. So we have, of course, strong movements against CETA, but I give advice to everybody who raises his finger. First, he should read the agreement before he raises his voice. And Europe must explain to its citizens, do we want to be part of the global village? Do we want to maintain also our interest based on rules of trade agreements, because it's not just free trade. The Canadians, for example, are protecting a bit their dairy industry. We are protecting a bit our meat industry. So there are things like this as well. And on the other hand, there is a Pacific trade agreement, which includes America, which includes Australia, which includes countries like Chile. So do we want to set the rules or the others? This is just a simple question.
Let's go back to the EU. I heard you saying that we have to balance between, in terms of fiscal adjustment, let's say, or financial policy, we have to balance between risk sharing and stability.
And sovereignty sharing.
Sovereignty sharing. Yeah. I do understand what sovereignty sharing means. What does risk sharing mean for you?
Of course, there was a quite interesting interview from the German and the French finance minister about common issues and how work functions in Europe. And the outcome was a bit that in one sentence it was said, yes, Germany has a problem with risk sharing and France has a problem with sovereignty sharing. Of course, we know that we have to complete, for example, that we have to find an answer how to develop structural reforms in all countries, how to find a common fiscal policy, what President Draghi from the European Central Bank is always asking for, not to land the central bank alone in the rain and to let her act and then only criticizing her policy. This does not work. We have to find other available models. And this means, for example, solidarity. Yes, of course, the EU budget via additional facilities as we are discussing as well, under certain conditions, and also to have a more clear rule about the functioning of the Eurozone, to come away from intergovernmental cooperation to create a modus where later we should act with the support of the International Monetary Fund. But finally, it was also a shame that we needed the International Monetary Fund. It was created not to help European countries.
I was supposed to ask you something else, but you give me an answer with the IMF. Do you think that somehow the IMF has to stay out at some point of what Europe does? I mean that I'm not referring only to Greece right now, but if you have to say united economy, then you have to create your own rules and your own mechanism. ESM is already on board. So do you think that countries like Germany or the Netherlands or the northern countries could survive without having in mind that we have IMF to monitor?
I think we need the expertise of the IMF. If you go to the Asian countries, there's also the creation of, let's say, a cooperation between Asian countries, but with cooperation of the International Monetary Fund. What we are suggesting is now that we want, in the long term, to develop the ESM into a European Monetary Fund, plus this fiscal capacity, we are talking additionally about it, to link it with conditions agreed in a legislative procedure. It has to do with democratic scrutiny. So, proposal from the Commission, arrangement between Council and European Parliament, financed this capacity from national contributions. We call it assigned revenues. This means the national parliaments are on board as well, because the question of ownership of the euro, it's national, because member states are the contributors, the contractors of the whole exercise. But we need, let's say, parliamentarization of the whole exercise and not the outsourcing of European Parliament and national parliaments. And then, of course, having this sort of readiness to help countries in a specific shock situation on top, and to prepare something in good times, which is available in bad times, what we all did not do sufficiently. So to give a certain contribution, let's talk later about the levels, and everybody pays in. In bad times, we have specific countries in a shock situation, and over a longer cycle, it should be more or less budgetary neutral. This is the starting point to regain trust and confidence that things are working like this. I believe that these country-specific recommendations are actually going very much into detail. We should concentrate on key elements as far as debt, as far as unemployment, as far as research and similar things is concerned, to define a roadmap via legislation. The rest is subsidiarity. To intervene into each budget line is just creating poison and will not help. I think this is one of the lessons we all can agree here. The main groups in European Parliament say in this direction. Therefore, let's develop a convergence code linked with the fulfillment of the convergence code, access to these funding, and instead of having a situation which is poisoning again, yet that you have, I do not know how many meetings of finance minister or meetings of the European Council itself. Normally, he shall not act in legislation, as the treaty says. To have a strong vice president of the Commission or finance minister on European level with the Treasury to monitor the Eurozone, to implement the agreed rules, common agreed rules, and with a more automatic procedure, and not every 6 months to come back to a political quarrel. I think this is not the best way how we should act it. So this is, I think, this question, yes, it's a bit risk sharing, yes, it's also some sovereignty sharing. And therefore, as a first step, to start with those elements which can be done without treaty changes until 2019 to show that we are ready to deliver. People want results. Technical debates are important, but they have to deliver results. And then to prepare the ground in case treaty changes, let's say for the European Monetary Fund, are needed. The adjustment of the treaty in a very limited format could be possible when we clean the treaty from the British exemptions.
I do understand all this, but it's a bit far, so I have to make the question in political terms, politically. What costs less, debt relief and the IMF, or not debt relief and trying to find another way? right now?
I think we have to, as I said, we need still the IMF because they have a real huge expertise. On the other hand, we are not developing
With the program, giving money.
This depends on how far we can come. There I cannot give an answer now because we are still in discussions and we don't want to go too far that these ideas are killed at the very beginning. So it's the idea to develop a stronger firewall from Europe itself with the appropriate decision-making process, and then we want to see that it functions.
And something last, we are heading to elections in Germany, in the Netherlands, in France. So I think that talking on finance, European finance and budgetary issues are not that sexy for the people. On the other hand, there is a strong need for, let's say, ORAMA, a new Europe, but a real Europe, a financed, a funded Europe. This is a bit contradictory. And given the fact that we have extremist populists all over Europe that are trying to take advantage of this, do you think that we can open an issue for a new Europe right now or after all these political developments?
There are two different positions. One position says, oh my God, we are facing so many crises. We are facing everyday elections, therefore let's go very, very slowly. The other question is, we are living in a global village. How much time really do we have to prepare ourselves until the next speculation is coming or before the next crisis is arriving where we don't know what sort of challenges we are facing? So therefore, I'm not a dreamer, but we have to stand up in the center of our societies and not to let the field in the hands of the populists and the nationalists, because for them today it's a simple thing. Just to say no is very popular because today in a globalized village you don't have simple answers. Things are connected with each other, and this makes it of course so complicated. And the tendency also in many member states just to comment negatively about Brussels, although the own governments were participating in the decision-making process, is just awful and poisoning again the situation. So therefore, I think in a reasonable way, we have to deliver on those crises we are facing, migrant crisis, more solidarity, more common border control. Let's take it also as a common financial issue as well to solve this crisis. Of course, we have to talk about security and defense policy. Imagination that we are surrounded by Putin, by Erdogan and Trump is a nightmare. And therefore, we have the question, this is our responsibility, not to lose time, but of course in a foreseeable time to be ready to deliver results and not just quarreling. Then we have a chance against the populists.
One last question. Do you expect a president from the EPP for the European Parliament right now?
We defined a timetable, and first we vote on our bureau of the EPP. This will happen already before December. And there is a contract, and the principal decisions in the parliament from the very beginning were 2.5 years, and then it's changing. Now Martin Schulz got 5, and I think time is over.